Hey everyone, welcome to our third in this four-part series on the Historical Land Records Viewer. My name is Michael Adams. I'm a librarian here at the library. As we start, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I'm presenting this on Gadigal land, so I invite you all to reflect on wherever it is you happen to be joining us from. I think this is particularly important given the light that the subject of this webinar is so closely connected to the idea of our relationship to land. So as I mentioned, this is the third in our four-part series, and in this webinar, we're going to be looking at Torrens title records. So I want to congratulate you all for sticking with it so far. I know it's a very complex area of research. The good news is that if you attended Wendy's excellent presentation on old system records last week, you've already done the hardest part because Torrens title is a much simpler proposition. So as we get started, I'll just let you know that we've got a lot to go over today, so we won't have time for questions. So if you do have any questions, please submit them through our Ask a Librarian service. And you'll also be getting a handout based on today's webinar. So yeah, so you don't need to take notes or anything today. Just follow me along. So as I said, Torrens title is a lot simpler than old system. And the reason for that has to do with what we were talking about in terms of the reason for bringing in the Torrens title system in the first place, what Glenda was talking about in our first webinar. And that is it was brought in to simplify the administrative procedures relating to land in New South Wales. And for our purposes today, the most significant change that had was to retain the same title certificate until the nature of the land changed, so usually via a subdivision. But what it meant is that unlike old system, when any time a piece of land was sold, a new title certificate was drawn up, in Torrens title, the same document remains, which makes it a much more straightforward process and also means that generally you get a bit more information on Torrens title certificates. So let's jump right in and have a look at how to find records in Torrens. So basically, when you are looking for land in Torrens title, you generally know one of two things. You either know the address of a land, so there's a specific property that you're interested in understanding the history of, or you know the name of someone who purchased some land. We're going to go over both of those scenarios today, and I'm going to start with that first example. That is that there's a piece of land and we want to look at the history of it. So to do this, we start not in the HLRV, but in the New South Wales Land Registry Services online portal. So I'm just going to jump in here. So the New South Wales LRS is the administrative body responsible for land in New South Wales, and they are also the ones that have put together the HLRV. The good thing about using the online portal is that, as you know by now, you can't just go to HLRV, type in an address and expect the database to bring up everything for you. That's just not how records were kept in land title. You can do that with the online portal. So I'm just going to go in and type in my address here, just like that. And that's brought it straight up. So we can see a nice map of the area here. I know I'm in the right place. And we can go in and do what is called a prior title search. So this is our key to finding our title reference that will enable us to look at our Torrens title certificate. And you can see it right here. We've got prior title search. So I'm going to click on that. We're going to type in the security challenge. And here we are. We're presented with this title reference. Now, we don't know it yet, but seeing this 4031 at the front is very good news. So what this number refers to is a volume and folio number, or as we'll refer to it for the rest of today, a vol-fol number. So we've got volume 4031, folio 151. This number just relates to how records were stored. So basically each individual title certificate was included as a folio, and these folios were housed in volumes. So I mentioned that 4031 is a really good number to see, and that is because only the first 8,497 volumes have been digitized and made available through the HLRV. What this means is if you go and do your search and get a number beyond 8497, you aren't able to perform the search in the manner that I'm about to demonstrate. So there are some ways around that. The most simple is unfortunately the most expensive, which is to actually use an information broker. So this can be found on the Land Registry Services website. If you go in here, find records, you can scroll down to available information brokers who you can pay to access the records for you. There are some tips and tricks to get around that without having to pay for it. So I'm going to be showing you that next week in our case study. But today, we're going to focus on the best case scenario. That is that we have a volume number below 8497. So let's go into the HLRV. So having that vol-fol number, that's an attribute number, which means we can bypass these refined search filters. Just click on attribute, look for vol-fol, and type it in here. And we can open that up. And now we are presented with our Torrens title certificate. So this is one of my very favorite historical resources. It is jam-packed with so much information, all on a 2-page document. So what we're going to do now is just to break down what we find on a title certificate and how to use it. The first thing we want to do is to establish that we are looking at the right document. Now, if you use the online portal, you shouldn't have any problems. Invariably, the title reference that you find will be relevant to the address that you've typed in. But if you find your vol-fol via other means, you might find it on a parish map or various other historical documents, they may be subject to human error. And it does happen that you'll get a vol-fol number, type it into HLRV and find that it is an area hundreds of kilometers away from where you expected. In this case, it's looking pretty good. So municipality of Hurstville and the suburb of Oatley. So that's really good. It tells us we're in the right place. But in terms of historical land, it's not the most important thing. So it's not always present on title certificates, for one thing. And secondly, as you all know, names and boundaries of suburbs and municipalities can change over time. What doesn't change is this information here, our parish and county information. So small caveat that in rare circumstances, the parish may have changed, the county never will. But just knowing that we're in parish of St. George, County of Cumberland, tells us that we are in the right place. And if you don't know your county and parish details, that is easily fixed by just going to the New South Wales Geographical Names Board. So NSW GNB, we can do a place name search. I'm just going to type in my suburb name, perform the search, click on view info here, and you can see here, Parish of St. George, County of Cumberland. So that's great news. We are looking at the right document. So let's move on. What else can we find on these title certificates? Let's start with a couple of key names and dates. So we can see here at the top of this main body of text, we can see that this title certificate was drawn up for William Greenhaw Horsfield of Oatley. He was a turner. If we scroll down to the bottom, we see a date. So we've got the 27th of July, 1927. So that gives us our date when this title certificate was drawn up. If we go just above there, we can see another name and date. So we've got that this was part of the grant to James Oatley, the man who gave the suburb its name. That was granted on the 31st of August, 1833. So right there is a very useful starting point. We now have the date that the title certificate was drawn up in 1927 and the original grant in 1833. So now we've got about 100 years either side of that 1927 date that we need to uncover. So what else can we find? If we stay in this main body of text, we can see some lot and section information. So we've got part of lot 38, section 29, in a plan deposited in the Land Titles Office 5510. So a plan deposited, in other words, a deposited plan. So when land is subdivided, a deposited plan is drawn up, and these maps or plans are available in HLRV. I will note not all of them, or not even anywhere near all of them. And unlike our vol-fols, where there's a clear cutoff point and there's an established logic as to what you will and won't find, it's not so simple for deposited plans. So the basic rule of thumb is that only superseded DPs will be found on HLRV, but not all of those will either. And in this case, this plan isn't available on HLRV. So next week, I will show you some that are, but for now, let's keep going. And if we keep on going down, what we have here with this map is basically a visual representation of the DP. So we've got part of lot 38, because we can see here the area in question is drawn in red, part of lot 38, section 39, and we can see the street name here. So in this case, this little diagram hasn't told us much that we didn't already know, but they can be a really useful representation of the information contained on these documents that can really help you if you're struggling to establish exactly where it is your piece of land is drawn on this map. And if we keep going down the page, we can see these stamped boxes with various names and dates. So what this refers to goes back to what we were saying about the same title certificate remaining until the nature of that land changes. So anytime there's change in ownership, or here we've got some mortgage information, that is written up on this title certificate. So this document becomes a working document that will show you changes to the land over time. If we go to the next page, we see more dealings here. We can see the land changing hands in 1971 and again in 1981. And so that is the last time we see a land dealing in this document. So it doesn't go all the way through to the present. It's basically the late 80s or the very early 90s will be the last time you'll see dealings represented on the title certificates like this. But that is a really good start. Now we've gone from 1927 all the way through to the 1980s. So it's giving us a lot of information about the history of this land. But what about going backwards from 1927? Well, let's go back to our first page and look up the top here. So what we've got here is our vol-fol number. So we've got 4031151. That is our current title, at least current when this was drawn up. If we look on the other side, we've got another vol-fol number included here. So 2712180. And you can see here reference to last certificate. So this is basically a prior title of this title. And we could look up this and then use that to get the title before and the title before and so on. So we'll be tracing that in full next week in our case study, but it just shows you what you can find on this title document. You can go all the way back to the start of Torrens title. Now, in some cases, there might only be 2 title certificates drawn in Torrens. In some, there might be 10. You never know what you're going to get. A lot of it depends on the history of the land. It also depends on when the title certificate was drawn up. So here in the 1920s, everything is nicely typed. We've got a standardized format that you'll find on basically any title certificate drawn up in this period of time. If you go further back, that information changes. So the way it's written changes. You'll get handwritten title certificates. You'll lose some of this information where lots and sections will be replaced by, bounded to the north by Mrs. McGregor's 400 acres and so forth. So a lot will change based on when the title certificate was issued and the history of that land. Now, the last piece of information that you'll find on these title certificates is up here. It's our application number. So that is our primary application. And in this case, we've got a primary application number of 7347. So I want you to keep that under your hats. We're going to get back to that at the end of our webinar today. So that's basically it, all that information on one 2-page document. So a fantastic resource and fairly straightforward to find, as long as you do have one of those lower volume numbers. So that is our first scenario. We have an address, we've used our online portal, and we've found our vol file number. So that's great if you're researching the history of your house. What if you're doing some family history research perhaps, or any other implication of this, where you know the name of a person who purchased some land, but you don't know where that land was? That is when you can use the Torrens Purchases Index. And in this case, we are going to use these refined search filters. And as we do so, I just want to demonstrate how much simpler Torrens is than old system. If we use this drop down in old system, we've got drop down upon drop down, index upon register, upon subindex upon subregister. If we close that and go into Torrens, we've got precisely 2 resources. We've got our old form Torrens register, which is what we were just looking at with our vol files, and we've got the Torrens Purchases Index, which goes from 1863 to 1971. So to use this, it's basically exactly the same process that you saw Wendy use in our old system indexes last week. So you can see the sorted into different volumes based on surname initial, and you can see some very skinny date ranges. So we've got 1888 to 1890 here, 1896 to 1900. So it definitely helps to have a rough estimation of when the person you were looking at may have purchased the land. In my case, I do. I'm going to look at some land that was owned by my grandfather. I'm an Adams, he's an Adams too. So I'm going to type in the A up here in our search bar. This is one where you just need the first initial. And you can see here, I know that he bought this land somewhere in the late 50s, early 60s. So there are potentially a number of different volumes I would need to go through to find the right one. As I've prepared this search in advance, I know that it is here in the 1956 to 1961 volume. So I'm going to go in here, and we see at the start here, we've got alphabetical order. So we've got AAs up here. I need to get to AD. So there are a number of ways of going through the pages. We could go page by page using the buttons up the top here. We could use these thumbnail images down the bottom to get to where we're going. Most useful, I think, is to use this jump to image feature. So if we open that up, we can see that there are 128 pages within this volume. It's not uncommon to see volumes with 600 or 700 pages. So scrolling each page individually isn't going to be a very economical way of searching. If you use this jump to image feature, you can go forwards and backwards. It's trial and error to get to the right page, but it's a lot easier to get where you're going. In my case, I know I need to get to page 17. So I'm going to go in here. Here we go. We've got some Adamses. And if we go, we keep scrolling, I know that I'm looking for a George Thomas Adams, and I know this is the right one. So we've got the name written here. We've got this number here, which is the instrument number. So that is basically the information relating to this specific dealing, this specific sale. So This information isn't available on HLRV. This is something you can pay a broker to obtain for you. What we can find on HLRV is what we were just looking at. So we've got another vol-fol number here. So once we've gone into the purchases index and found the vol-fol, it's exactly the same process. We just need to go down, put our vol-fol number in, 4095199, and look at our title certificate. And this is where the purchases index really comes in handy, because I can see here that this title certificate was originally drawn for William Adams, who is the grandfather of my grandfather, and it was drawn up in 1928. If we go down, we can see more dealings relating to this land, going down here to George Thomas Adams of Queanbeyan and Butcher in 1960. So that's basically all there is to using the purchases index, is to get the vol-fol number. So it's doing the exact same thing that we were doing through the LRS online portal, with the difference being that we didn't have an address, we had a name. That is all there's really to show you about the purchases index, except to point out again the way that the information is presented will change over time. So if we go in here to 1863 to 1867, which is of course our first volume under Torrens title, you can see it's still in alphabetical order. We get a bit more information as to the nature of the land included here. It's a lovely looking document, nicely handwritten. We've still got those instrument numbers, and then we've still got our vol-fols, which in this case require knowledge of Roman numerals to be able to use, and for obvious reasons are a lot lower in number. So we've got volume 3, volume 7 here, etc. But other than that, it's a very straightforward resource to use. It's just a matter of knowing approximately when the person purchased the land. So that's Torrens title. It's very simple compared to old system, but of course land was being sold in old system for decades prior to the introduction of Torrens title. This means that getting from old system to Torrens title can be somewhat complicated, and this is the procedure known as a primary application, that is applying to convert the land from old system to Torrens title. Now there are two main elements to keep in mind in terms of primary application. Firstly, it is the primary application packet. So this is the document that is used to establish the chain of title. So it will include title deeds, wills, various legal documents. It'll have correspondence between landowners and land title. It might have birth, death, and marriage records, anything that goes into the process of establishing a chain of title and therefore converting that land from old system to Torrens title. So this information, the primary application packets, aren't actually available on HLRV. You need to go to state records to be able to use them. What you can find on HLRV is the working documentation that went into this process. So these come in 3 forms. There's search books, sketchbooks, and miscellaneous books. And we're going to have a look at our Oatley example to just point out a couple of things about primary applications. So that was 7347. I'm going to type that in here. And you can see in this example, we only get the search books. So you don't always get all 3. In most cases, you'll get a search book and a sketchbook. Here we've only got a search book, and it's a 5-page document. Let's open it up and see what we can find. So 5 pages, but these first pages, we've basically got a cover page, and it's not till we get here to this handwritten page that we start getting to the good stuff. And when I say this is a working document, that is exactly what it is. You can see it here. It's basically somebody's notebook where they've recorded the various information they found in the process of converting old system land to Torrens title. So it starts at the top here with that original grant to James Oatley. We can see here an Oatley Estate Company Limited set up to subdivide the land. We can see a book and number here and some details about when parts of this land was sold. So this is the primary function or the primary use of these search books, is to record any sales of the land that occurred under old system. So they'll include names and dates when possible and the book and number. So then you can go back and trace the land that way. But if we look here, that's the only land sale that we find in this primary application search book. We go back to here, nothing useful found on this page. If we go to our last page, what we get is a Volfol reference for the certificate of title that was drawn up as a result of the transfer of this land from old system to Torrens title. Let's just have a look, and this might tell us a bit about why the information in this primary application isn't very detailed. So let's go in. I'm going to close that. 908. So we can see Oatley Estate Company Limited here. I'm going to jump straight ahead to our map. So you can see here, this is the map. All this area in red is the land contained in this one title certificate. So what that means in terms of our primary application, and if you have a look at here, this was our original block that we looked at the start of our webinar. Down here, over here, the other end of the suburb is in that same primary application that was lodged. So that's a distance of over 2 kilometres. So what's happened here is that basically the land was granted to Oatley in 1833. Torrens title was introduced in 1863. Not much happened to that land in terms of development through the 1860s. And it wasn't until the 1880s when the land and the suburbs started to be developed that something needed to be done. So basically the whole suburb of Oatley, or most of it, was converted to primary application, to Torrens title at the same time without much of that land being sold beforehand. So that is a very basic primary application that didn't require much work to figure out and hence doesn't include much information in our search book. Primary applications are very much a lottery based on the history of the land you're looking at. If we look at another example, so this is land in Darlington, in Sydney's inner city. So you would expect that there will be a lot more information in terms of dealings of that land over time. Here we do have a search sketch and a search book. I'll just say now, we've probably got about 5 minutes to go, so we are going to run slightly over today. So I apologize for that. We've just got a lot to get through. Here we've already got some really useful information. And I got to say, this isn't really usual to see it recorded so neatly in a nice table like this. So this goes back to what we're saying about primary applications being a bit of a lottery. It's not only dependent on the history of the land, but it's also the processes that this individual person went through, or their way of making sense of information will change how the information is presented in the primary application notebooks. So here we can see various sales of this land over time. We've got some lot information here. We've got an estate name here. We can see it's relating to different parcels of the land. We've got individual lots being sold. We've got whole parcels being sold. If we go through to our next page, we get a nice visual example of this primary application, which will also show you what I mean about the way they work. So this is Darlington Road. So Sydney's inner city, and you will see that if you know that area at all, these are adjoining terraces that are covered in the same primary application. That these terraces are in a different primary application to land right next door. So we've on the one hand had a whole suburb being converted at the same time. Here we've got individual properties being converted to Torrens title at different times. If we go in here and you know that this is your lot, you've got specific book and numbers included as part of this diagram. So a very useful document to give you that visual representation and help you make sense of what you are looking at, keeping in mind that there might be a big area converted at the same time. You want to make sure you're looking at the right section of that area. So finding the right book and numbers that are relevant to your search. Let's go in and have a look at our search books. And once again, we're going to start here where we get the handwritten stuff. We've got details on the nature of this conversion. So this primary application is relating to lots 25, 26, and 29, as well as parts of 24, 27, and 28 of the Golden Grove estate. If we go down, we can see that this land is part of 52 acres granted to William Hutchinson in 1819. And there is the start of the information we find here. So we've got it going back to 1819. Here we've got some various details relating to that grant. So in this case, there was a requirement that the government had the right to build a road through part of that land. In other cases, you might see, there had to be a quarry or various other conditions for that land being granted. But from 1819, we need to get to the point that the land was converted. So here we've got all the sales relating to that land. So it'll be different parts of that land being sold at different times. If we look over here, we can see this land relates to the Briggs family. And when I say birth, death, and marriage certificates, will documents, keep in mind how complicated land sale can be with various family members receiving land at different times and all the other things that go into the sale of land. And we can keep going from there. I'm not going to go into too much detail today, because if you're looking at one address within this primary application, you may find a lot of reference numbers here that don't relate to you. So it's just a matter of wading through it and making sense of it through these book numbers, going through, getting lot numbers and making sure you're looking at the right portion of land. We can then go through right to our last page. And again, at the end here, we've got a new title certificate being drawn up. So we've got a vol file of, I'm just going to close that, and 3833 239. And if we have a look here, we can now see that same sketch that we saw in our primary application now being represented in a title certificate. So this title certificate relates to all that land that was converted. As that land is sold again over time, if we go in here and look at our dealings, we can see part of that land being sold off and a new title certificate being drawn up. So it's a matter of using these different resources to make sense of the history of the land you're looking at. So the primary application search books and search sketches can really help fill in those gaps and give you a clearer picture of the history of that land. And that is where we're going to end it today. As I said, next week, we are going to be doing a case study where we put everything we've learnt over the last 3 weeks into context, as well as give you a couple of harder examples, some tips and tricks for getting by some of the obstacles you may face in your searching. So I hope you'll all join me for that next week, and thank you for tuning in today. See you later.